Hey guys, welcome to Red Balloon, welcome to Movie Chats. And I just wanted to have a chat about Man of Steel. I did a Man of Steel video there previously. You can check it out. It's just what I think is the good, the bad, and the ugly with regards to Man of Steel. What worked, what maybe didn't work. But whilst I do think there are issues with Man of Steel, while I do think the DCU under James Gunn and the new Superman movie could fix some of those problems that existed within Man of Steel. Maybe take it to a new level of kind of fantastical superhero fun whilst still having drama and serious moments. More of a balance between the light-hearted, maybe over-the-top MCU and then the overly serious, overly dramatic kind of Man of Steel. A balance of the two would actually be just insanely good. What I wanted to talk about was Man of Steel versus Superman 1 and 2 from Christopher Reeve's era. Because whilst there are issues with Man of Steel, and whilst I think the new Superman film could go a level above, I do think Man of Steel is the best Superman film to date. I do think it's better than Superman 1 and 2, and I'm going to give my reasons for that. So, one of the reasons Superman 1 and 2 is nowhere near as good as Man of Steel, and I'm not talking about visual effects. I'm not going to compare the unbelievably exceptional visual effects that you see in Man of Steel and then compare that with Superman 1 and 2 made in the late 70s, early 80s, right? Obviously, I'm not going to be comparing things like that. But things like cinematography, like fighting choreography, okay, writing, all the things that you could have done in the late 70s and early 80s and 2013, there was no barrier. There was no reason why one would be less than the other, right? So let's talk about, for instance, our introduction to Superman, right? In Man of Steel, we see Clark exploring the world, becoming familiar with different kind of cultures, different kind of people, groups, and backgrounds, trying to find his place on the earth, right? We see him struggling with his powers as a kid in school, right? We see how frightening that can be. We see him still heroically saving people, not just as a young kid, but also as an adult. And not only that, but we see him refraining from doing things that all of us would do, right? Like when the bully is picking on him in front of his father's garage, and he's literally squeezed the iron gate in anger. He refrained from actually hitting him, right? Because he could have killed him. And in the diner, when there's a man, he's sexually harassing one of the waitresses, Clark stands up for her. He puts his ego aside. He has a drink dumped on him. He has a can thrown at him. He gets insulted. And because she doesn't want any trouble, he just leaves. He refrains from doing something he would regret. Something he's grown up with. Treating the earth with kids' gloves, right? This is an exceptional introduction to the character. It shows us a lot about who he is, the kind of man he is. And while I still think we saw a lack of personality and charisma within Clark Kent in Man of Steel, you do see a great depiction of the kind of man he is. And then he becomes Superman after he finds his ship, learns about the origins of Krypton, learns about his father, why he's on Earth, right? And there's just this great, especially when we visited Krypton, we got to see Krypton in Man of Steel in its glory. Like, I mean, it was at the end of its life, but we got to see it really cool, right? And comparing that to Superman, where when his father dies of the heart attack and then he leaves, he goes into the the kind of the North Pole, the Northern Hemisphere, and he gets his Fortress of Solitude. Don't get me wrong, I love the Fortress of Solitude, and I think the Fortress of Solitude is a better depiction than what we see in Man of Steel. But he just goes in there and then he just comes out, like, I don't know, 10 years later as Superman. Like, he spent all his time in there just like downloading the history of Krypton, and I don't know what he was doing, but he went in and he comes out as like a 35-year-old man, fully fleshed out Superman. No mistakes. Basically just this confident, heroic, I'm not going to say one-dimensional, but it lacked nuance, right? He just comes out as this fully confident Superman. He knows who he wants to be. He knows who he is, and that's it, right? And then all of a sudden, the film moves on from there. In Man of Steel, he's battling Zod and Fiora and all these other beings that are as powerful as him. He's never unleashed himself like that before. He's literally Superman for a day, and he's trying to save the Earth from the World Engine and then these Kryptonians. On day one, he's making mistakes, of course, right? There's seriousness built around everything that's going on, and he has to grow from that, right? So I just think we see a much better Superman who grows up exploring the Earth and becoming Superman than what we get in Superman 1 and 2, where he just disappears for like 10 years and all of a sudden he just leaves the fortress and is a fully fleshed out Superman who knows exactly what he is, what he wants to be, and how he can help the world. So I just think it lacks a bit of complexity. Now, Superman 1, he's going up against Lex. Lex's plan is ridiculous. It's stupid. He just wants to create an earthquake so he can grab land and become rich. I mean, that's in Superman films, that's always Lex's plan. He just wants to become rich, right? Even in Superman Returns, when we have Lex Luthor, which is supposed to be the same Lex as Gene Hackman's by Kevin Spacey, we see it's the same story. He just wants to create land, have land, become rich. As a villain, it's not that complex. I'm not even going to get into the overly comedic, nonsensical Gene Hackman Lex, who is just surrounds himself with morons as opposed to proper henchmen. Right? In BVS, the Lex Luthor, whilst I don't think the casting was great, he was still wrote brilliantly. Right? He's a politician. He's a scientist. He was a philosopher. He was a philanthropist. He was criminally insane. He was like, he kidnapped he kidnapped Martha Kent and then was going to have her burned alive. I mean, the guy was nuts. Right? But he was everything that Lex should be. Like I said, the scientist, the philanthropist, the political, aspirational, criminally insane, unethical nut job, right? That's what Lex should be. And he surrounded himself with proper henchmen, KG Beast, and really powerful people, as opposed to Gene Hackman's Lex, who just surrounded himself with comical, stupid people. That's not why Superman 1 and 2 is not as good, right? We're not going to get into the Lex side of it. The villain is not written well. In Zod is one of the best villains I've seen. So in Man of Steel, the villain is far better. His story is better told. His reasoning and his motivations are far better. And then we get into one of the worst things. In Superman 2, we see Zod and Fiora, right? They come into it, right? And we have Superman 2 and we have Man of Steel. But in Man of Steel, Zod is threatening. Fiora is like popping people's heads off and destroying planes, right? Zod, he's throwing cars into houses. He's literally, like, they're literally killing people, army and civilians. They don't care. In Superman 2, Clark faces off against Zod and Fiora. And the fight scenes are shocking. Again, I'm not talking about visual effects. I just mean the fight scenes. Like when he's like this and he kicks him and he flies into the Coca-Cola sign. I mean, the fight scenes are shocking. Right, back then we had like Rocky, right? We had unbelievable martial arts films, great boxing films, right? Great action films. There's no reason for the fighting to be choreographed in such a campy, horrible way, right? We see some of the fighting that happens in Man of Steel on the ground, the blocking, the punching, the ducking, right? I'm not talking about the visual effects of flying through the air, punching each other, which you obviously couldn't do back then. But just the standard on the ground fight scenes and hits, they could have done something way better in Superman 2. It was horrible. And then comes the worst part of it. Zod learns that Superman's weakness is that he cares for the people. So he starts to blow wind at them. And they're fighting against the wind. And Superman is like, Zod, stop it. And he flies off. And people think that's good, because he flies away. isn't Reeves' Superman very lucky that when he flies away, Zod just doesn't kill everybody? Because in Man of Steel, in Smallville, before Zod is stopped, they are going to kill everybody. And then in Metropolis, when Zod loses any hope of Krypton, he basically vows to kill everybody on the planet. Superman doesn't have the choice to just fly away, because if he does, everyone dies. In Superman 2, he flies away and he's like, oh, it's grand. And then you've got Zod and Fiora and they're sitting in the White House and they're running the planet. Like, what the fuck do they care about political power? They are all powerful beings who could run the entire planet and destroy it if they wanted. Their motivations were just nonsense. And the fact that Superman is able to fly away and that's thought of as good storytelling is terrible. Zod realizes that his weakness is that he cares for the people. All he had to do was start laser eyeing them, burning them all alive, killing them, and that would have kept Superman there. He would have had to stay and fight. So just really, really poor. So not only was the fighting in Superman 2 very, very bad, the fact that the villains knew the weakness of Superman, yet they still let him fly away. Terrible. Also, the diner scene. So Superman gets beaten up by a trucker because he's human, but yeah, when he gets his powers, he goes back and beats up the trucker just because he can. What the fuck is that about? Let me know what your thoughts are on Superman versus Man of Steel. Superman 1 and 2 or Man of Steel. Which do you think are the better films? And put your nostalgia aside. If you're older, or if you're as old as me and you've actually seen both of them, super. But put your nostalgia aside. Which is the better film? Which has the better villain? Which is the better narrative? Which has the better hero? Right? I'm not saying the more fun hero, but which one makes the better decisions? Which has better fighting choreography? Which one has the better dialogue? Right? Which one has the better villain motivations? In Man of Steel, I'll have you know, Superman saves 45 individuals. He saves 45 people, 5 of which were Lois. In Superman 1, he saves 10 people, 5 of which were Lois. So in Superman 1, half the people he saves are just Lois over and over again. Whereas Superman in Man of Steel, it's less noticeable. Because yes, he still saves Lois 5 times, the same amount, coincidentally. But he still saves 40 other individuals from death. And he goes on to save the planet twice. So, for me, Man of Steel is by far better than Superman 1 and Superman 2. Much better movie, much better film, much better story. But I have very high hopes that the DCU, Superman 2025, can give us a better balance of the seriousness and drama and action that we see in Man of Steel, combined with the heart and maybe some fun of Superman original films. Let me know your thoughts. Which is your favourite movie? There's no wrong answers, but I would love to know them. Comment below, like, subscribe, and as always, check out our cartoons, Little Bastards. The second episode of that is coming very soon. Cheers, guys. Bye.